Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. It wasn't the darkness that scared Eleanor the most, it was how familiar the silence had become. The basement was cold, damp, and smelled like forgotten things. Mildew, rotted wood, and dreams that had long since curled at the edges. She had stopped screaming days ago, or maybe weeks. It was hard to count time when the only sound you had was the echo of your own heartbeat. Each drip from the leaky pipe above her was a slow tick of madness, and yet she hadn't lost her mind. Not yet. No, she was saving that for the moment she would finally stand face to face with the woman who now walked freely in her kitchen, wore her robes, and likely smiled into her mirrors. Her name was Tessa. That name once meant nothing, a passing mention, a woman in heels too high for the office. But now it tasted like bile on Eleanor's tongue. Sometimes at night, when Nathan was home, Eleanor would press her ear to the floorboards above her, and she could hear them laugh. Not just laugh, but live, as if her absence had unclogged the arteries of their happiness. That was the part that broke her more than the cold floor or the bruises blooming beneath her skin. It was knowing that her home had moved on without her. A house she painted herself. A pantry she arranged alphabetically. A marriage she stitched together even when the thread was clearly unraveling. And now she was beneath it all like a secret they didn't want to admit existed. It hadn't always been this way. Once Nathan looked at her like she was made of morning light, soft, essential, and too gentle for the storms of the world. He used to trace the freckle beneath her collarbone and call it his North Star. Now she could barely remember the last time his eyes held anything but fog when they landed on her. Things began to sour when he hired Tessa under the guise of needing fresh energy for his real estate firm. Tessa had this air, like perfume that lingered too long in a room. She smiled with her teeth, but her eyes were always counting. At first, Eleanor thought she was imagining it, the extra button undone, the sudden visits to their home with files that could have waited till Monday. But then came the wine on the counter, the toothbrush in the guest bathroom, and the way Mira, their 10-year-old daughter, once accidentally called her Auntie T. No one ever told Eleanor she was being replaced. That's the cruel thing about betrayal. It doesn't walk through the front door wearing boots. It slides in quietly, barefoot, smiling, asking if you'd like tea. And Nathan? He didn't even fight the tide. He just let it carry him, dragging their vows behind him like seaweed. One night, Eleanor confronted him, not with rage, but with a quiet that could slice marble. "Is she staying here now?" she asked, and he couldn't meet her eyes. That was all the answer she needed. She went to bed with her ring still on, but her heart already packed in boxes. The next morning, Eleanor woke to a splitting headache, a dry throat, and the unmistakable feeling that something was wrong. She was lying on the cold concrete floor of the basement, and the light bulb above her blinked like an uncertain eye. Her wrists ached, her vision spun, and her screams ricocheted off the walls like birds trapped in a cage. She banged on the door until her knuckles turned red, but no one came. Not Nathan. Not Mira. Not even the housekeeper who once hummed church songs while dusting the windows. Only later did she hear footsteps, heels clicking like punctuation marks across the wooden floor above her head. Then laughter. And then silence again. The betrayal was no longer emotional. It had taken form. Someone had drugged her, locked her in, discarded her like expired medicine. And Tessa? Tessa had become the leading lady in a play Eleanor didn't audition for. But Eleanor wasn't the type to wilt in darkness. No, she knew how to listen, to the pipes, to the floor creaks, to the soft weeping she suspected was Myra's at night. She whispered prayers into the shadows and remembered the stories her mother once told her about women who outlived the fire that tried to burn them. This was no longer about Nathan or the woman in her bed. This was about a fight Eleanor hadn't trained for, but was born to win. In the thick of night, when the world above slept and only the rats dared move, Eleanor made a promise to herself. If this house would one day hear her footsteps again, they would not be the quiet ones of a woman hoping not to be noticed. No, they would thunder. She would walk into that kitchen and reclaim the space that once held the scent of her jollof rice, not Tessa's imported pasta sauces. She would wipe her daughter's tears with her own hands, not hear them drop from above like water through a sieve. But she knew she had to be smart. The rage that curled inside her chest like smoke needed direction. So she began to map her surroundings, how many paces from the boiler to the door, how high the window slit was, what time the light above flickered like clockwork. Eleanor counted moments like breadcrumbs and stored her strength like winter grain. And in those quiet moments, she remembered a spare key Nathan had once hidden behind the third loose tile near the stairwell, back when Mira used to play hide-and-seek. Tessa may have taken her place upstairs, but she didn't know the bones of the house. She didn't know its secrets. And that, Eleanor realized with a slow smile, was going to be her salvation. As the night deepened and the floor above settled into stillness, Eleanor crawled to the wall and began to dig. The mornings upstairs came like music through a ceiling, muffled, fragmented, yet full enough to bruise Eleanor's chest. The faint scrape of chairs against polished tiles, Myra's soft voice rising like a bird, unsure of its song, and once, just once, Nathan's hollow laughter. These were the sounds Eleanor lived by now. She had stopped calling them warnings in her head. They were echoes of a life she used to own, passing above her like clouds over a forgotten roof. Tessa had slipped easily into the rhythm of Eleanor's house, folding herself into routines that were never hers to claim. She moved like a cat that had learned the corners of a home not by living in it, but by marking it. She brewed coffee with cinnamon, even though Nathan preferred ginger. She redecorated the living room with throw pillows that didn't match the curtains. She rearranged the framed photographs, placing those with Eleanor face down, as if trying to erase her without lifting a single finger in confrontation. But beneath all her polish and perfume, Tessa was playing a dangerous game, because a woman who'd never known what it meant to build a home was now attempting to rule one. And even the glossiest snakes eventually shed their shine when the light hits just right. Mira, in her small, quiet way, was the ghost that haunted Eleanor more than the house itself. Through the vents, Eleanor sometimes caught snippets of her daughter's voice, soft, hesitant, often ending with a question no one answered properly. "When is Mum coming back?" she once asked during what sounded like breakfast, the clinking of cutlery barely covering the silence that followed. Nathan had said something vague, something slippery, like she needed time to clear her head. Eleanor pressed her palm to the cold metal grate above her and closed her eyes until the ache in her chest spread like wet ink. Mira was a child of order, a girl who color-coded her notebooks and arranged her dolls by name and height. She thrived on predictability, and now every day was a guessing game she never agreed to play. Tessa, for all her manipulative finesse, had no clue how to mother. She bought Mira glittery shoes that pinched her toes and told her to stop crying when the girl missed Eleanor's bedtime prayers. She bribed affection with trinkets from the mall, but never once brushed Myra's hair the way Eleanor did, slowly, rhythmically, humming that song from when she was 3. In that basement, Eleanor didn't just feel the loss of her freedom. She felt the theft of her motherhood, bit by bit, like someone snipping away pages from her favorite book while pretending to borrow it for safekeeping. Tessa's presence in the house became more brazen as the days crawled on, like mold that starts in corners and spreads without fanfare. She had begun to wear Eleanor's clothes, pinning them tighter at the waist to fit her own form. She used Eleanor's favorite teacup, the one with the faint crack at the rim, and left it on the bedside table Eleanor once dusted with reverence. She sat on Eleanor's reading chair and crossed her legs like she owned the years that had softened the cushion beneath her, but she underestimated the walls. Houses may not have hearts, but they remember. The hinges creaked differently when Tessa walked past. The kettle hissed louder when she used it, and even the family dog, sent away temporarily, used to bark from the neighbor's fence every time she stepped outside. Nathan, now too comfortable, too dulled by lust and routine, didn't notice the subtle dissonance in the air. He had stopped asking questions the moment comfort came dressed in youth and flattery. He was no longer a man seeking truth. He was a man hiding from it. And what he didn't know was that Eleanor, down in that damp belly of the house, was starting to remember everything he had forgotten. She traced secrets with her fingers, like that third tile under the stairwell where Nathan once hid a spare key, back when trust was strong and games were innocent. It was still loose, still there. Time, she realized, was no longer her jailer. It was her accomplice. The first time Eleanor touched the tile with intent, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of decision. She had watched enough suspense movies to know that freedom didn't always arrive like a trumpet blast. Sometimes it crawled in quiet, like a shadow slipping through a crack. She waited for days, observing the pattern of Tessa's movements, when she showered, when she left for errands, when Nathan was out for meetings. Her ears had become her eyes. Her thoughts, like soldiers in single file, marched with precision. When the moment came, it wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, like the smell of bread in the morning or the way a door creaks when no one's watching. Tessa had gone out in Nathan's car. Mira was at school. The housekeeper had been dismissed 2 weeks prior. The house was breathing alone. Eleanor slid the tile free, reached in, and her fingers met cold metal. The key, still there, still hers. She clutched it like a lifeline, kissed it like scripture, and whispered, "You didn't take everything." But she didn't rush. Not yet. A war isn't won in the moment you find your sword. It's won in how and when you swing it. She returned the tile and sat in silence, her body shivering not from cold, but from the silent scream of awakening. It was no longer about escape. It was about return. And return, Eleanor had decided, would not be silent. The day Eleanor chose to rise was as quiet as the stillness before a clap of thunder. No alarms rang, no curtains fluttered like flags of warning. It was the kind of morning where time moved reluctantly, as if the house itself sensed that a balance long tilted was about to be restored. With the spare key hidden securely in the lining of her skirt, she sat cross-legged beneath the wooden stairs, her breath paced, her body still, her spirit loud. Her ears tuned to the familiar pattern of departure, the closing of a car door, the mechanical whir of the gate, the long silence that followed. Nathan had driven off in a rush, barking into his phone about a client meeting. Tessa, who usually lingered behind to indulge in her morning tea, had left unusually early, keys jingling like careless laughter, unaware that the woman she locked away had memorized the rhythm of her vanity. Eleanor waited until even the refrigerator hum seemed distant, until she could no longer hear the world above holding its breath. With trembling fingers and teeth clenched tighter than a prayer in a storm, she turned the key in the lock. The click echoed like a gunshot in her chest. The door creaked open, not in a burst, but with the hesitation of a wound learning how to breathe again. She stepped out barefoot, the floor biting her soles like forgotten memories. But it wasn't pain, it was proof. She was back in her home, and her silence had brought her here. Eleanor didn't race up the stairs or scream through the house like a banshee. She moved like smoke, quietly threading through familiar air. The house, once vibrant with her touch, had turned cold and curated in her absence. The family portrait on the hallway shelf had been swapped with a sleek metallic sculpture that screamed everything and meant nothing. Her curtains were replaced with gauzy panels that let in light but filtered out warmth. The throw rug in the living room was no longer the one Mira picked on her 7th birthday. Instead, a sterile beige rectangle sat there like an unwanted guest that wouldn't leave. Eleanor took it all in, not with fury, but with the grief of someone who realized her home had been repainted while she was still living in it. She walked into the kitchen and opened her spice drawer. The jars had been reorganized alphabetically, but the smell was wrong. Her hands lingered over the jar of dried usiza leaves, one of the few things untouched. She smiled faintly. "They never know what's worth keeping," she murmured. From the living room, the soft creak of the ceiling fan turning half-heartedly matched the slow swirl of her resolve. She wasn't here to reclaim things. They had already taken those. She was here to reclaim herself, and everything else would follow. Her footsteps led her to Myra's room, and Eleanor's breath hitched as she pushed the door open. The walls were still the soft coral they painted together one summer, but someone had peeled off the butterfly decals from the wardrobe and replaced them with geometric stickers. The bed was neatly made, but the corners lacked the care of a mother's hand. Eleanor sat on the edge of the mattress and inhaled deeply. The scent of her daughter still lingered on the pillow, mixed with the faint sweetness of lotion and lavender. She looked around and found one of Myra's old drawings tucked in the side of the bookshelf, a picture of 3 people holding hands under a crooked sun, one tall, one medium, one small. She traced the lines, blinking away the film over her eyes. Then a sound, a slow turn of the key in the front door. Eleanor rose from the bed like smoke lifting off hot coal. She didn't rush. She didn't hide. She walked back into the hallway and waited. The door swung open, and Tessa strolled in, sunglasses perched on her head, phone tucked between shoulder and cheek, murmuring sweetly to someone named Babe. Her shopping bag hit the floor just as she saw her. For one long second, the world stood still. Tessa's mouth opened, but no words formed. Eleanor stood in the hallway, shoulders square, gaze steady, like a queen reclaiming the land that had been stolen one lie at a time. "I believe you have something that belongs to me," she said, voice as soft as silk but sharp enough to cut steel. The confrontation was not loud. It was surgical. Tessa's voice, usually sweet and sly like honeyed poison, cracked as she tried to reassert her ground. She stammered something about Eleanor not being well, reaching into her bag as if a receipt or some invisible permission slip would validate her theft, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She walked past her, went to the living room, and picked up her old Bible from the shelf where it had been stuffed beneath an ornamental tray. She opened it and pulled out a folded sheet, a copy of the CCTV backup file locations Nathan once shared with her during a burglary scare. She dropped it on the coffee table and met Tessa's wide, panicked eyes. "You think you know this house," Eleanor said, voice low, "but you don't know its heart, and you certainly don't know its history." Tessa's facade crumbled like paper in a storm. She tried to reach for her phone, but Eleanor stepped forward with quiet authority. "Call Nathan," she said. "Tell him I'm home. Tell him I'm not dead. Tell him his wife wants to speak to him in her house." The moment stretched between them, thick as molasses, and as Tessa's fingers trembled over the screen, Eleanor walked calmly to the dining table, sat down, and crossed her legs. She wasn't here to plead. She was here to be seen, not as the woman who vanished, but as the one who never left. Tessa made the call. Her voice shook. And Eleanor smiled, because the war had shifted, and this time the battlefield was hers. The first thing Nathan noticed when he walked into the living room was not Eleanor seated at the dining table, nor the tension in the air, so thick it could be sliced with a plastic spoon. It was the way Tessa stood frozen, shoulders hunched like a child caught stealing from the communion tray. The man who once ran deals across boardrooms and smiled at strangers like life owed him nothing but applause was suddenly a boy in the presence of consequence. Eleanor didn't rise when he entered. She didn't blink or flinch. She simply turned the page of her Bible, not reading, just letting the air vibrate around her like a silent hymn. Nathan's keys slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud, a sound that seemed to ring louder than thunder in the crowded quiet. He stammered her name as if tasting it for the first time after months of chewing another woman's laughter. Eleanor, he breathed, and she closed the book gently. "You look surprised," she said, her voice measured, her expression unreadable, like the calm that hides just before a bridge collapses. "Should I have called ahead?" Nathan turned to Tessa for explanation, but her lips fumbled uselessly. "She was gone," Tessa whispered. She left. You said she needed help." "Help?" Eleanor stood now, not with drama, but with the gravity of a woman who had learned that strength doesn't always show its face in volume. "Is that what you called locking me in a basement?" Nathan blinked again, as if trying to focus on a dream that had become a nightmare wearing his wife's voice. "Basement? What are you talking about?" he asked, though the crack in his voice betrayed the truth he already suspected. Eleanor tilted her head, not accusingly, but with pity, like a teacher watching a student try to deny a test they clearly failed. She walked to the center table, where she'd laid out evidence like holy offerings, a printed log of the smart home app showing when the basement door was accessed, audio recordings saved to a backup folder that captured Mira asking about her mother, the spare key, her scratched palms, and the CCTV export locations. "Do you want me to explain these two?" she asked, eyes never leaving his. Nathan picked up the paper like it might burn his fingers. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I thought you'd left. Tessa said you—" He stopped. It was the kind of silence that begged for shame, but found cowardice instead. Tessa tried to interrupt, babbling about how it was temporary, how she thought Eleanor was unstable, how Mira needed consistency. "So you became her mother?" Eleanor snapped, turning to her now, "with my child sleeping down the hall and my body locked beneath her feet?" Her voice didn't rise, but the air around it did. Tessa paled, her arms folding over herself, as though protecting something that no longer wanted her shelter. "This wasn't the plan," she whispered. "Plans are for architects," Eleanor said sharply. You just squatted in my life and tried to rewrite my story in pencil." Later that evening, after Tessa had been asked to leave, not with a fight, but with a simple, quiet sentence from Eleanor that said, "You have until sunset to be gone," Nathan sat in the living room like a man whose suit had just been stripped in public. He looked older than Eleanor remembered, more slouched, less golden, like a statue left too long in the rain. Mira was at her friend's house for a sleepover, a visit Tessa had arranged days earlier to clear the home for redecorating. That alone told Eleanor everything she needed to know about Tessa's plans. The rug was already rolled up near the door, her perfume bottle left beside the sink, and a printed deed of cohabitation stuffed in Nathan's briefcase. Eleanor picked it up and dropped it on his lap. "Was she trying to marry my house or you?" she asked, her tone almost amused. Nathan didn't answer. His fingers ran through his hair like he was trying to pull out the guilt by its roots. "I didn't know," he said again, more to the silence than to her. Eleanor sat across from him, arms folded. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." The TV played quietly in the background, muted news anchors, mouthing other people's tragedies. "Why didn't you look for me, Nathan?" she asked finally. "Why did no one come down those stairs?" He didn't speak for a while, and when he finally did, it wasn't a confession. It was a whisper. "Because it was easier to believe you left than to face why you would." Eleanor didn't need an apology. She needed understanding. And sometimes they weren't the same thing. She spent the night in her old bedroom, showering 3 times as though each rinse could strip the scent of neglect from her skin. Her nightgown hung a little looser on her frame, but her spine felt stronger beneath it. She wasn't thinking of revenge. That ship had sailed with Tessa's last footsteps across her porch. She wasn't thinking of divorce either, not because she was clinging, but because her heart wasn't finished deciding. She thought of Mira, of how the little girl would wake up tomorrow and walk into her mother's arms without needing a map to find her. That thought gave Eleanor something no courtroom could offer: peace. Downstairs, Nathan fell asleep on the couch, his body curled like regret. And the house? The house sighed in relief, like a song finally returned to its rightful key. In the quiet, Eleanor opened her journal and began to write again. Not about pain, not about loss, but about what it meant to return, not just to a home, but to oneself. For the first time in months, the pen felt like a sword, and her handwriting came back steady. She ended the page with a single sentence. I was never gone. I was just beneath. Morning in the house no longer felt like a stranger entering through the back door. It came with the quiet confidence of something returned, something that once walked away but decided to stay and start again on its own terms. Mira's voice was the first sound Eleanor heard at dawn, softly calling, "Mummy," like a question that had lived too long on her tongue. Eleanor sat up, brushing away the last wisps of sleep as the door creaked open and Myra's small frame stood hesitantly by the doorway, eyes wide with uncertainty. There were no grand speeches, no cinematic reunions with background violins, just the rustle of bedsheets as mother and daughter closed the distance, arms wrapping around one another like pages reuniting with their story. Mira buried her face into Eleanor's shoulder, whispering, "I knew you didn't leave." Eleanor, holding back a dam of tears, kissed her daughter's hair and whispered back, "I never could." That morning, Eleanor made breakfast, not because she wanted to prove anything, but because the rhythm of peeling yams and slicing onions brought back a calm she hadn't felt in months. Mira sat at the counter, feet swinging, asking questions Eleanor didn't fully answer. Some truths, she decided, were best released like steam from a boiling pot, slowly, gently, with care for the one waiting to be served. Nathan remained on the couch long after the sun had fully claimed the sky, staring at nothing, wrapped in the linen blanket like a child in time out. He hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved much beyond shifting from guilt to regret. Eleanor noticed, but didn't comment. She moved through the house with the grace of someone who had taken back her name from the mouth of mockery. Mira had gone to school, her cheeks flushed with relief, her steps lighter. Eleanor folded the laundry with slow precision, her mind elsewhere. That afternoon, she sat across from Nathan at the dining table, not for confrontation, but for clarity. "There's no punishment that would satisfy me," she began, voice steady. "You let someone turn my home into a stage, and you played your part without blinking." Nathan raised his eyes, hollow and lost. "I didn't know what to do," he muttered, rubbing his forehead like he could erase the days that passed by pretending they didn't exist. "I was scared. Tessa said you were unstable." Eleanor almost laughed, not out of humor, but from the absurdity of hearing her own pain framed like madness. "Unstable? You locked me underground and called it carelessness." He winced, but she leaned forward, her voice a whisper wrapped in steel. "I didn't climb out of that basement for revenge, Nathan. I came back for myself, for Mira, and for the house that remembered me even when you forgot." The next few days unfolded like a careful negotiation with time. Eleanor reclaimed her routines, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. She resumed watering her potted plants on the balcony, even though some had withered beyond saving. She replaced the curtains with softer ones, rearranged the furniture to match the flow of her thoughts, and deleted Tessa's login from the smart home system with the press of a button. She found her rhythm not by pretending nothing happened, but by acknowledging every bruise the silence left behind. Nathan, for his part, tried to be present, making tea without sugar like she liked, asking if she wanted company during Mira's soccer game, sitting across from her with the air of a man desperate to glue back a cup he shattered with his own hands. Eleanor didn't hate him. Hatred took energy she wasn't willing to waste. She simply watched him, measuring his words against his silences, his gestures against his past. One evening, he tried to reach for her hand across the table, and she pulled back, not in anger, but with the quiet honesty of someone who no longer wanted to be touched by fingers that once pointed her away. Love isn't a switch, she told him, and you turned off the light when I needed you the most. When the legal proceedings began, they weren't messy, just necessary. Eleanor's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Corinne, came highly recommended and moved like she'd been preparing for this her whole life. With every document signed, every statement recorded, Eleanor felt lighter, as if the house itself was exhaling with her. Tessa, whose name appeared on nothing beyond a forgotten necklace found in the bathroom cabinet, had vanished from Baymore entirely. Gossip swirled like dust behind her heels, but Eleanor didn't engage. She wasn't interested in dragging mud when she had gardens to tend. Nathan tried to delay the inevitable, asking for time, for discussion, for one last effort to fix what had turned to ash. But Eleanor had tasted freedom not just from the basement, but from the weight of waiting for someone to choose her. She told him gently, "You stopped choosing me long before Tessa showed up. I just didn't stop choosing you." On the day the house title was legally reestablished in her name alone, she walked its halls barefoot, touching walls, pressing her palm to the stair rail, running fingers along the grooves of the pantry door. Not in triumph, but in gratitude. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a homecoming. And even if the roof had once sheltered betrayal, it now held something stronger, a woman who refused to be buried twice. The first rainfall of the season came softly, like a gentle apology from the sky. It tapped on the roof with the rhythm of distant drums, not loud enough to interrupt, but steady enough to remind the house that something had changed. Eleanor sat by the window in her reading chair, wrapped in a soft shawl that Mira had folded and placed beside her earlier. Her fingers curled around a cup of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched, eyes fixed on the quiet street outside. The world had continued moving as if it hadn't missed her, but she didn't mind. She wasn't trying to catch up. She was learning to walk alongside herself again at her own pace. There was a different silence in the house now, not the cruel, suffocating kind that once swallowed her whole, but a peaceful quiet filled with small, living things. The whir of the fan, the pitter-patter of rain, the occasional creak of wood shifting in place. Mira played quietly in her room, humming an old lullaby Eleanor had taught her before the storm of their lives broke through the roof. It wasn't the same house anymore. The light fell differently, the shadows weren't as sharp, and even the corners felt warmer. Eleanor hadn't won in the traditional sense. There were no medals, no parade, but she had survived something that many wouldn't have spoken about. And that survival, she realized now, was not the end. It was the beginning. On Sundays, Eleanor had begun to host what she called small returns, moments she reclaimed deliberately, gently, one at a time. A walk with Mira to the local market, slow enough to stop for roasted corn. A return to her sketch pad, where she now captured not faces, but feelings, shapes of sorrow, outlines of resilience. She even reached out to two of her old friends, who had assumed she traveled or was unwell, based on the vague updates they'd received during her absence. The first meeting had been cautious, the second warmer, and by the third, they were laughing about things that had nothing to do with basements or betrayal. Nathan still called occasionally, asking if she needed anything, if Mira could come over for dinner. She'd allowed it, cautiously. Not because she trusted him again, but because Mira deserved a chance to love her father without the poison of adult disappointment dripping into every interaction. She set boundaries like fences, not to trap anyone in, but to protect what was finally growing within. And she no longer flinched when her phone rang, or when someone knocked at the gate. The world was no longer a threat. It was a place of choices, and she had learned how to make them again. Not from fear, but from fullness. Not to please, but to protect peace. There were times Eleanor would lie awake at night and ask herself if she could have prevented it all, if there was a moment she missed, a signal she ignored, a kindness she mistook for safety. Those questions came like wind through an open window, sudden, uninvited, but real. She never answered them. Not because she lacked the courage, but because she finally understood that healing wasn't about solving the past. It was about making peace with the pieces it left behind. The house, which once felt like a crime scene draped in silence, had slowly become a place of memory and motion again. She repainted the basement walls, not to forget, but to reframe. She donated the clothes she no longer wore, planted rosemary by the front steps, and moved the reading chair from its old corner to a new one that faced the rising sun. Mira started sleeping better, laughing deeper. And though Eleanor rarely spoke about those days out loud, her actions whispered the truth, that she had walked through fire, and now her breath no longer carried smoke. She didn't need everyone to know what she had endured. She just needed the floor beneath her feet to remember it had held her through it all, and still stood firm. The final sign of change came one crisp afternoon, when Mira came home with a painting she'd done at school. It showed a house, not perfect, not symmetrical, but bright, colorful, and blooming with trees. 3 figures stood in front of it, a little girl, a tall woman with wild curly hair like Eleanor's, and a man standing at a distance, waving. Eleanor studied the image for a long time, her fingers brushing the edges like she was holding something sacred. Mira looked up and said, "I made sure everyone had space." That sentence, so simple, folded something in Eleanor's chest into a quiet place of peace. She hugged her daughter tightly, not just as a mother, but as a woman who had learned that strength wasn't always about standing tall. It was sometimes found in bending without breaking. That evening, Eleanor lit candles around the house, not to ward off darkness, but to celebrate light. She made dinner slowly, singing an old tune under her breath. And when she sat down to eat, she didn't fill the other chair out of habit. She let it remain empty, not out of loneliness, but because it symbolized what had been cleared, what had been healed, and what could now be filled, someday, only if it felt right. The house was hers again. Not because she had chased someone out, but because she had reclaimed herself within. Dear listener, sometimes life locks us in rooms we didn't walk into ourselves, spaces of silence, betrayal, or abandonment, and it might feel like the walls are closing in, like the people who should have searched for you stopped knocking too soon. But hear this, even in the deepest dark, your light is never lost. Like Eleanor, you may be bruised, silenced, or sidelined for a season, but that doesn't erase your place, your worth, or your voice. Don't rush your healing just because others want you back quickly. True restoration happens slowly, one small return at a time. And if you ever feel like someone has taken over your story, remember you still hold the pen. Your comeback doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be true. Let this story remind you that survival isn't always found in the fight. It's often found in the stillness, in the quiet mapping of your next move, and the unshakable decision not to give up on yourself even when others do. You are not too late. You are not too lost. And you are never beyond return. Heavenly Father, thank you for the quiet strength you plant in the hearts of those the world overlooks. Thank you for being a refuge in hidden places, and for walking with us even in the moments when the doors are locked and the lights feel far away. We pray today for anyone listening who feels stuck in a season of silence. Lord, remind them that you see them clearly even when others don't. Restore what was taken from them, not just the tangible things, but the dignity, the joy, the voice, and the vision. Give them courage to reclaim what belongs to them, their peace, their purpose, their name. May they rise not in bitterness, but in quiet confidence. May their homes carry laughter again, their hearts beat with freedom again, and their hands hold on to grace, even for the ones who broke them. For every tear shed in the dark, give them double joy in the light. For every why they've whispered, answer with a peace that passes understanding. Teach them how to heal without hardening, how to speak without shouting, and how to walk into their own house like a woman who knows heaven never left her side. Let this be the season where what was buried becomes what blossoms. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.